chapter 9. And where in chapter 9 are we? We are talking about the Nefesh HaElokis versus the Nefesh HaBahamis, the internal struggle, the animal versus the godly soul. And effectively what we've learned so far at this point in time is that they have different fields of operation. So the primary stomping ground, the headquarters of the Nefesh HaBahamis, the animal soul, we said is in the impulsive heart. And the headquarters of the Nefesh HaElokis, of the godly soul, is in the brain. And effectively what we're trying to describe over here is that if you hear a voice, if you feel a drive in life that is impulsive first and rationalized afterwards, well, that's probably the Nefesh HaBahamis speaking, not problem. That is the Nefesh HaBahamis speaking. But if you are motivated towards something that is meaningful and that is valuable, and then you don't necessarily, but immediately, but perhaps over the course of time, start to feel the emotional connection, then you know that the Nefesh HaElokis, the godly soul, is speaking. You know, it's really interesting because it comes this time of the year. Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur is on our doorstep. And there's a lot of conversation around inspiration. Are you inspired? Do you feel inspired? Don't you feel inspired? Does the shul inspire you? Does the service inspire you? You know, all these various conversations around inspiration. And a lot of disappointment. There's a lot of disappointment that people feel at this time of the year because we know intellectually that it's supposed to be a very meaningful and uplifting and connected and spiritually aspirational time. And on the one hand, and on the other hand, it just doesn't feel like it's happening, right? It just doesn't feel like it's happening. So what we're learning over here in the Tanya should give us a little bit of solace, because this piece of the Tanya says, well, things that just automatically speak to the heart and give you chills up and down the spine and make you excited doesn't necessarily mean that it comes from the healthiest place. Whereas things that we know are worthwhile and then we have to work towards them, that might be a better indicator that we're dealing with our neshama. So it's just an interesting positioning statement before we actually look at the Tanya this evening. Okay, so where are we? If you've got the Tanya book in front of you, it's on page 36. Perek Tes, 36. And more specifically, what we're going to do is, we're going to review a little bit of what we already started to discuss last week. So if you go down, it is 2, 4, 6, kind of like 8, 9 lines down the page. You'll see that there's a word, shebarosh. Straight after that word, there is a full stop, and we're going to start after the full stop. Okay? So that's if you're looking at the book, and if you're looking on the screen, so then it's going to pop up onto your screen now. And I'll just scroll down to the correct place. There you go. Ach. So that's where we are. Ach. And we did begin this last week, so it's not absolutely new information. And then shortly, we'll obviously begin a new section of the conversation that we haven't yet visited. Ach. Mekoim mishkan nefesh HaElokis. Where is the headquarters? Where is the so-called residence of the nefesh HaElokis, of the godly soul? Hu b'moichin sheberosh. And remember, we actually touched on the fact that moichin is a plural word. So it's in the intellect, and the intellect is multifaceted. So that's where the neshama likes to live, where it likes to express itself. In other words, the neshama is seeking what the seichel can determine, which is objective values and objective truth. So instead of saying, what do I want, what do I need, the neshama, the nefesh HaElokis, interchangeable with the word neshama, says what is right, what is valuable, what is important. And when you have a look at this, and we did touch on this briefly, but when you have a look at this, it would seem that the distinction between nefesh HaBahamis thinking and nefesh HaElokis thinking is very much about the conflict that exists in modern society, where there's this very prominent feeling of nefesh HaBahamis, because I feel something, therefore it has to be right, versus the direction of the Nefesh HaElokis, which is to say, but there's a truth, and we have to discover that truth, and we have to learn what that truth is, and then we have to adapt our lives to accommodate and to be aligned with that truth. So then we said in Mishamis Vashetas L'chol Oivarim that the nature of the Nefesh HaElokis' influence is that it will begin in the heart, in the mind, but then it will spread and will seep into all the various other components of the body, including the heart, v'gam belev, into the right-hand side of the heart, she'ein by dam, which is free of blood. As we said, the pasuk tells us that the wise person's heart is to the right. Okay, now let's get to, so that's where we learned last week. So now let's get to what we're going to speak about this week, because ultimately what we need to do is we need to find what does this actually mean? All this conversation about the Nefesh HaKis and how it's going to have an influence and so on and so forth, it's all very nice in theory, but in practice we have to know exactly what it means. So, let's take this word love. Why are we going to take the word love? Because we've been talking about the heart, and there's a natural association that people have between the heart and love. Secondly, the very first of all of the emotions that we describe when we analyze the nature of the human makeup and the neshama's makeup is love. We always talk about love as the first component. So what's the difference between love in the world of the Nefesh HaBahamis, the animal soul, and love in the world of the Nefesh HaKis, the godly soul? What's the difference? There's a very overused, I don't know, maybe it's not overused. There's a well-known joke, let's put it that way. You know what the difference is between a well-known joke and a good joke? A well-known joke is a joke that you've heard before. A good joke is a joke you haven't heard before. So the joke goes like this, that there is this individual who sitting at a restaurant, and they overhear somebody from the next table telling the waiter, "I love fish." So this person gets very excited because they actually work with the Greenpeace and save the whales, and they get very excited. "You love fish?" "Well, I love fish too," kind of thing. Except obviously it's a little bit awkward just to go over to a stranger in a restaurant where they're just ordering their meal, and but this person's literally itching for the opportunity to go over and to talk about their mutual love of fish. And about 15 minutes later, the chef walks out carrying the steaming plate of salmon. And suddenly the activist, the whale activist, gets absolutely nose out of joint, really frustrated, marches over indignantly to this other person and says, "How dare you say that you love fish? You've just killed a fish. You're eating a fish. You don't love fish. You love yourself." And effectively, if you think about it, that's unfortunately the problem with how we speak, the language that we use. How is it ever acceptable? Have you ever thought about this? How is it acceptable that we have the same word in the English language to describe the sentiment that we have towards our spouse or our children or a dear friend and chocolate? In other words, a person could say, "I love my children," and a person could say, "I love chocolate." How? What do you mean? You can't put the two into the same category, obviously. What are you gonna? Would you ever do the things for chocolate that you do for your kids? But that's the problem. The problem is when we talk about love, very often we don't acknowledge, we don't discern that there are different kinds of love. There's love that is true love. There's love that is love of ourselves. Do we love chocolate? Or do we love what chocolate does for us? And then we can challenge ourselves to the question, do we love our children? Or do we love what they do for us? By rights, the love that parents have for their children in a healthy relationship would be unconditional love. But there are also unhealthy relationships where parents either increase or decrease their love for their children depending on what the children do or how they behave. In that case, you're not loving your children, you're loving yourself. So if you conform to my way of life, then I love you. That means I don't love you. It means I love me. So when you align with me, then I love you. Because actually that means that by loving you, I'm loving me. So the Nefesh HaBahamis, the animal soul, uses the language of love. In the modern world, we talk about the 5 love languages, right? And you've got to identify what the love language is of the significant people in your life, because obviously if you communicate with them with the wrong love language, then you're going to get mixed messages and they won't feel that you actually love them. But here we're saying not different love languages, like whatever the love languages are, quality time and words of endearment and whatever the love languages are. Here we're saying the same word can mean something completely different, it can be completely different language. When the Nefesh HaBahamis, when the animal soul says, I love something. So what are the things that the Nefesh HaBahamis usually loves? I love that item. Oh, I love that handbag. I love that comedian. I love that food, that caterer, that exotic location. I love the fact that people acknowledge me on social media. I love the fact that I've been upgraded in my job. I've been given a promotion. When the Nefesh HaBahamis uses the word love, usually the overture is, or the undertone is, I love me. It's the impulsive heart, the self-interested heart. And then because I love me, I'll also justify afterwards why actually I need that thing, or I love that thing, or I'm committed to that thing. Let's look at how love operates in the language of the Nefesh Elikis. It's going to be really different. So let's see. Vehi ahavas Hashem. When we talk about love, because remember, we said that the Nefesh Elikis primarily works through the mind and then has influence over the heart. So when it influences the heart, that will first appear as love. What is the love? Ahavas Hashem. Love for Hashem. Now, is it possible for a person to love Hashem and be self-interested in their love of Hashem? Is that possible? What do you think? Think it's possible? A person could say, I love Hashem, but actually what they mean is that they love themselves. It's 100% possible. And not only is it possible, it's actually quite common. Let's use an example. I'll give you a little bit of a roundabout example, but let's use an example. So there are two people sitting, or there's a group of people sitting at a table. Classic Friday night. You know, in the books, we're told that on a Friday night, you're supposed to sit at your table and share meaningful content and sing songs that bring in the mood of Shabbos, and you're supposed to share words of Torah, whatever. That's the template of what a Friday night table is supposed to look like. And what an actual Friday night table looks like is probably a bit of a blend. It's like one of those magazine shows, you know, where they've got the latest gossip about this one and the political analysis. There are all kinds of things that happen. And then at some point, if it's a really good Friday night table, you'll also have a debate. So you've got a group of people sitting around the table and they're debating. What are they debating? So let's use an example, the death penalty. So what's the debate? Is Judaism in favor of capital punishment or not? That's the debate. Now what you'll find is, in that debate, the two sides of the debate very likely are going to be based on the people's personal view. So you've got one person who believes an eye for an eye and people must suffer and they did bad and therefore bad should be done to them, and they'll be completely in favor of the capital punishment argument. Whereas other people will say, you know, at the end of the day, human life is valuable and maybe there's a way to rehabilitate the person and there's got to be an alternative, and we become like them, you know, they killed so we kill, and then how does all that work? And you just perpetuate this cycle of violence. And so that person is sensitive, and because they're sensitive and they feel uncomfortable with the principle of capital punishment, that's why they have their views. So the person who says that the Torah is in favor of capital punishment is going to find, and trust me, there's definitely material that they would find to support their position that the Torah is in favor of capital punishment. And the person who is a pacifist and does not believe in violence and doesn't think that we should be executing people, they will find sources in the Torah that support their opinion. So what are they both doing? I love myself. Why do I love Hashem? Why do I love the Torah, which is of course Hashem's wisdom? Because it supports me. I've got a particular view. My view is that we have to have a harsh way to deal with those really ugly personalities called criminals. And therefore I love the fact that the Torah supports me. And the other person is a pacifist and a peace-loving individual. So I love the fact that the Torah supports me. Neither one of these people is capable of actually experiencing what the Torah is about if that's their attitude. Say, listen, this is what I like, and I want Hashem to support me. So is it possible for a person to have love of Hashem, or at least the perception of love of Hashem, and it has self-interest? Yes, it is definitely possible. That's not what we're going to describe over here. Rather, we're going to describe, this is Ahavas Hashem, this is the love of Hashem, Kerishbei Shalheves, where the love is like flames of a fire. Mislaheves, which is alive and burning and combusting, belev maskilim, in the hearts of maskilim. Interesting word. What does maskilim mean? So maskilim comes from the root seichel, which is intellect. And maskilim means people who expand their intellect to understand and appreciate things about Hashem. And therefore, hamevinim, therefore these are people who understand, but not only understand, or mizboinanim, they contemplate and they meditate on their understanding, but daitam asher b'moicham, using the insight that is within their brain, bidvorim hamaoirerim es ha'ahava. They focus on things that are going to arouse love of Hashem within them. So in other words, what does this mean? The Nefesh HaLekis knows that there's a mitzvah in the Torah, that you have to love Hashem. It's a mitzvah, got to do it. The big question about that mitzvah is, how? How you got to tell me how to feel? You ever tried this as a parent? Tell your child, you will smile. Yeah? Ask the photographers, right? Right? Ask the photographers. You can't make somebody feel a particular way. At the best, you can get them to paste something on their face that looks like a smile. What they call the flight attendant smile. You know what the flight attendant smile is? I don't even know if I could do it. But it's basically, that, come along, they say, chicken or beef, chicken or beef, like. So you could put on a face, you could masquerade that you look like you're feeling a certain way. But you can't tell somebody how to feel. The Torah tells us how to feel. You have to love Hashem, your God, as we know very well. Shema says it, with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your might. How can you tell me how to feel? So if Hashem is good to me, then I'll love Him. And that's what you find. You find people running around, oh, I love God. God is so amazing. Why? Because my child gave me nachas today, or the business deal went through, or my team won the sport. I don't know what it is that people believe makes them think that Hashem loves them. And then there are gloomy days. And if the whole basis of feeling that Hashem loves me is because He's done good things for me, then on the gloomy days, I'm not so sure that He loves me, and I'm not so sure that I love Him. We're having a little bit of an issue, right? We're going through a bit of a bumpy ride at the moment because Hashem's done X and Y and it didn't exactly suit my agenda. So right now, I don't love Hashem so much. And the Torah tells us that you have to love Hashem with all your heart, and all your soul, and all your might. The Torah is not telling you flip the on switch for love, because there is no on switch for love. It's also like that well-used cliche. What's the difference between ignorance and apathy? And the answer is, I don't know and I don't care. But there's a profound message in that cliche. The profound message is, if I don't know, how could I care? You can't care about something you know nothing about. How could I care? Ve'ahavta, that you should love Hashem, doesn't mean that there's some kind of a magical potion that you take and then you have love of Hashem, or a switch that you switch, or a circuit that you close and then you love Hashem. Love of Hashem means mizboinenim bedaitom asher b'moicham. It means that a person activates their brain to contemplate on those topics, bidvarim hamaoirerim esa'ava, things that will stimulate love. If this sounds just a little bit higher grade or a little bit far-fetched, the truth is it's not entirely different when dealing with human emotions and relationships. Let's say that there's a married couple Now, every married couple, whether you like it or not, this is the bane or one of them at least of marriage, you'll always be thinking about each other. It's inescapable. The only question is what you'll be thinking. So you get some couples, what are they misboinen? Because your mind doesn't stop, right? The mind doesn't stop, and this is a person who you interact with multiple times a day, every single day of your life. So it's obviously going to occupy a lot of brain space, a lot of RAM. So what are you thinking about? Oh, he's a lo yutzlach, this guy. He doesn't know how to make a living. He's completely emotionally tone deaf. She has no sense of budget. I had a funny story this week because I had to drop some money at somebody, and I didn't drop it myself. I asked somebody who was going that direction anyway if they could drop it off. So I check up with them. I say, did you drop off the money at this particular house? So the person says, yes. I said, who did you give it to? So the person says, I gave it to the wife. I said, okay, I was just worried because I hadn't heard from the husband that he had received the cash. So the person who dropped it off said, maybe he didn't. Maybe she spent it already, right? So, that's it. You have no sense of budget. You have no sense of control. You think money grows on trees, just spending this. We're all going to be misboinen on something. It's the nature of relationships. We're going to land up focusing and contemplating on something. So what do we advise couples long before any of this happens? When couples get married, there's all these premarital classes and talks and pep talks and all that kind of stuff that happens before couples get married. What do we try and advise people? Be misboinen on dvarim ha'ma'orerim es ha'ahava. You know what you should think about and concentrate on and decide and choose to feed your brain with? Things that will stimulate more love for your spouse. Because you're going to be using your mind anyway. You're going to be focusing on them anyway. You're going to be thinking about the things that they do or they don't do anyway. But you just get to choose. What are you going to be mispointed on? And the principle therein is that there's no such thing as you just get married and then you live happily ever after. Even in Hollywood, that doesn't happen anymore. Right? There's no happily ever after. Maybe, I don't know if it was ever since Walt Disney died. I don't know. They no longer made princesses that live happily ever after. I don't know. But it doesn't just happen. You have to invest. The nature of mature, meaningful love is that it's something we invest in growing. But first, we have to know that it is worth growing. Imagine if a person sat down every single day and had a meditation about how beautiful and wonderful it is to eat chocolate. Now, first of all, you don't need that because the nature of how Hashem designed us is that our attraction to chocolate does not require any further input. It's there, it's natural, whatever. But imagine that's what we thought about every single day. Can you imagine? And you get people like this. You actually get people like this. We call them connoisseurs. Spend their whole day focused on a particular kind of human pleasure. They become an expert. They know the nuance. It's like I've always joke about the whole MasterChef concept, There's people sitting there making a whole kvetch. It's got an infusion of this and a trace of that and a chveis, What do you think in the shtetl? Can you imagine if they had MasterChef cholent in the shtetl? I'm saying, okay, we can taste, you've got just enough, the right mixture of beans that you put into the cholent. It's absolutely, If that's what you misboinen on, if that's what you focus your mind on, then that becomes what you love. And that becomes what obsesses you, and that's what you think about day and night, and that's what makes you tick. And that's, obviously, if it's good, what attracts you, and if it's not so good, what upsets you. So the nefesh, the godly soul, says, before you start to choose what you're going to focus your mind on, work out what's worth the attention. What's worth the investment of your brain? The greatest, most developed organ in the whole of the physical creation, the human brain. Where does it belong? Does it belong in becoming the greatest expert on exactly which player was sold by which soccer team for what price? To become the greatest expert on this is the latest fashion that's coming out of wear? Or Say, this is the greatest gift that Hashem gave me, this incredible organ that is unparalleled in the whole physical universe. What am I going to concentrate on? Dvarim ha'ma'orenim esa'ava, something that's going to stimulate me to have a meaningful, passionate relationship and connection to Hashem. So the nefesh elikis, the godly soul, says the most valuable relationship is between you and God. Invest your brain there. Think about it, concentrate on it, contemplate, learn more about it. So there's a big difference between the orientation of the animal and the godly soul. Last week we said the nature of the animal is that it is a spirit that drags you down. The nature of the human is it's a spirit that elevates you up. This is exactly where the difference is. The Nefesh HaBahamis says, if this is popular, I'm going to get involved. If this looks attractive, I'm going to get involved. The Nefesh Elikis says, let's find out. Let's do some research. Let's apply the mind, and then we'll invest the mind so that we stimulate and produce a meaningful kind of love and relationship. Now, love is the first example that he uses. It's not the only example. V'chein simchas levav. The other question is, what is the joy that the person feels? Besiferes Hashem v'hadar geoinoi. Well, the Nefesh Elikis, if it has its way, generates a joy just to be associated with the Tiferes, the magnet, the grandeur, the beauty of Hashem. Kasher einei hachacham asher beroishoi. Because when a wise person whose eyes are in his head, later on in Tanya, the Alter Rebbe will come back to this, and he'll ask the question based on the Zohar to say, well, where else would your eyes be if not in your head? And he'll explain that effectively what that means is it's got nothing to do with the anatomy of the body, it has to do with where the eyes are focused. The eyes are focused in things of the mind, the eyes are focused in things of the head, things which are greater than the here and now. Where the person's eyes are oriented within the machinations of the intellectual process, chokhmah bina, which are the various types of how we process things intellectually, mistaklim bikora de malka v'siferes gedulosoi, and the person focuses themselves to be able to look at, obviously it's in the mind's eye, Hashem's great grandeur and His greatness ad ein cheker ve'ein soif, that is absolutely infinite, v'tachlis, and it's without any limitations, kimavur b'mokim acher, as explained in other places. So let's understand for a second what that means. In today's world, one of the most important things that you're expected to achieve is to be happy. And this has been going on already for a while. The happiness delusion has been going on for a while. Because if you had to look back pre-Holocaust, I don't know if it was an aspiration that people had to be happy. It's an interesting point. But in today's society, it's the ultimate. As long as they're happy. How often do you hear that in today's society? As long as they're happy. So we're not going to interfere, we're not going to judge people's choices, we shouldn't judge people, right? But we're not going to interfere, we're not going to make a criticism, we're not going to even give insight, as long as they're happy. The Nefesh HaBahamis defines happy in a way that is altogether different from simcha. And let's try and unpack that. So, for example, when we were kids, for those of you who remember, there was the Boswell-Wilkie Circus. Right? Remember the Boswell-Wilkie Circus? And in Boswell-Wilkie Circus at the time, one of the main acts, it's going back a long time, was Tiki the Clown. Anybody remember Tiki the Clown? So the following anecdote was not Tiki the Clown. But it's a good story anyway. So there's this guy who comes to his psychologist because he's feeling extremely, extremely down. And the psychologist says to him, listen, I don't know what to tell you. We've tried this form of therapy, we've tried that medication, nothing's really happening. But I have to tell you something that's worked for many of my patients recently, and that is to go to the circus and watch whatever. But the main act that you should really watch is Tiki the Clown. It's hilarious. It will lift your spirits and you'll feel good. Guy says, listen, Doc, with all due respect, it's not going to work. But what do you mean it's not going to work? Don't dismiss something before you've tried it. He says, Doc, I'm telling you, it's not going to work. And now they go back and forth, and he's trying to convince the guy that he should go watch Tiki the Clown. Eventually, the guy says to him, it's not going to work because I am Tiki the Clown. In other words, what's the message of the story? The message of the story is happiness is not necessarily funny. It's a mistake that people make. People think that if you laugh, you're happy. I've seen, and you've probably seen it too, that sometimes when people are faced with serious loss, they laugh. And sometimes when people are in a state of tremendous simcha, they cry. I'm sure you could tell us many occasions, right? In fact, when our son Mendy got married, so we told Shana, our little daughter Shana, so we told her that, there's going to be a wedding, and we explained everything that was going to happen and whatever. But nobody bothered to tell her that people might cry at the chuppah. So she couldn't work this out, like what's going on. And you told me it's going to be such a happy time, and then everybody was crying, and it totally spooked her. Because at the end of the day, simcha is not laughing. Right? Joy is not, it's not measured by laughter. So what is simcha? So here he tells us, if it's the nefesh habahamis, if it's the animal soul says, I need a whole lot of stuff to be happy. And that's consumerism. That's the world that we live in. I need a whole lot of stuff to be happy. Not only that, but I have to constantly upgrade that stuff, because after a while it no longer makes me happy. The Gemara calls it the person who has 100 zuz, which was the currency at the time. The minute they have 100 zuz in the bank, automatically feels they need 200. And then when they get to 200, that's when they feel they need 400. Now, we all laugh when we hear that, because we say, like Tevye in Fiddle on the Roof, we say, well, if I were a rich man, if I had the 100. What's the expression? Our sages say, who is happy? He who is satisfied with his lot. I would be happy, but I don't have a lot. So there's this impression that we have that it's all true, it's 100% true, that if you get to a certain point of wealth, that's when you've got to apply what the Gemara is saying. But right now, I'm not there yet. And so the Nefesh HaBahamis keeps going to say, I would be happy if. I will be happy when. So I'll be happy when the lights come on. Yeah, that's the South African one. I'll be happy when the lights come on. And stay on. And the next person says, I'll be happy. It's like kids. Have you ever spoken to kids? So the kid says, I can't wait until I'm in primary school. Then I'm going to be able to wear one of those uniforms, and I'll be a big knacker, and I'll walk around, and whatever that is. Get to primary school, can't wait. I'm going to be happy when I'm in high school. Because then I'm going to have certain freedom, I can have a later bedtime, and I don't have to do this particular subject, I can dump it, whatever. Get into high school. You know what? When I finish school, then I'll be happy. Because then no one's going to tell me what to do, and I'll have a car, and I have a license, I have freedom, whatever the case is. The person gets out of school, what do they say? When I finish my degree, then I'll be happy. Because then I'll be able to earn, and I'll have a qualification, and I'll be a macher, and whatever the case is. The person gets a degree. When I settle down and have my own family, then I'll be happy. And when of course, you know what the next one is, right? When the family is old enough that I don't have to look after them every 5 minutes, then I'll be happy. When they move out of the house, then I'll be happy. And so we go. Because the Nefesh HaBahamis, seeing as it's self-oriented and seeing as it's impulsive, defines happiness as what's going to make me feel good in the now. And that's elusive, it's a moving target, and we just never achieve it. That's why there's such a massive industry of therapy and self-help books and Prozac and all these things, because the Nefesh HaBahamis is a bottomless pit of need. So what does simcha look like in the context of the nefesh elokis? Remember, the difference between the nefesh habahamis and the nefesh elokis is that the nefesh habahamis, the animal soul, starts with a position of what I want and then builds a whole philosophy around it. The nefesh elokis, the godly soul, starts with the pursuit of something that is meaningful and important, and then decides that it's worth getting involved in, it's worth feeling. In other words, the nefesh elokis doesn't feel happy. The nefesh elokis doesn't become joyous. The nefesh elokis creates joy. Just as the Torah tells us, "Ve'ahavta es Hashem elokecha," that you have to love Hashem, the Torah also tells us, "Ivdu es Hashem b'simcha," that you have to serve God with joy. And you know what the sting in the tail is in that? You're supposed to serve God all the time. It's not only like when you're davening and when you're learning and when you're doing a mitzvah. You're supposed to always be serving Hashem. So ergo, you're supposed to be joyous always. Who could do that? Today the weather wasn't so good. Guy gets a flat tire. Stock market goes down. Things happen. So if we come from the nefesh habahamis perspective, which is to say, make me happy, it's a moving target. If we come from the nefesh elokis perspective, which says, me make happy, and I have to create simcha, then it's a conscious choice and decision. And no matter what the external circumstances are, we still have the power to make that conscious decision. Let's go back and read it. Where does the nefesh elokis find simcha from? From the same place it finds love, meditation, realization, awareness, a perspective. Have you ever had this conversation? Most likely. I think most people have had a conversation of this sort, to greater or lesser extent, with their kids. If I would have had what you have, I would have been the happiest person on earth. When I was your age, right? We always stick it, right? When I was your age, we didn't have these kinds of things. If you wanted, like the photo example, yeah? When I was your age, we had to take the photo and then we had to wait and then we had to develop it and we only got to see the picture. You take the picture, look at the screen, you see it immediately. So effectively what we're saying is, we're saying you don't appreciate how happy you should be. That's what we're constantly lecturing our children. You don't appreciate how joyous your life is. You don't appreciate how good you've got it. The nefesh elokis says, exactly that. Not how good you've got it because we live in a modern world and we have luxuries that were unthinkable for our grandparents, certainly our great-grandparents. I mean, if you think about it, those of us who live, let's say, middle class, even lower middle class, we live at a level of luxury that our great-grandparents never knew was possible. Running water. A microwave. Let's just think of these things. But that's not what the nefesh elokis is saying. The nefesh elokis is not saying, look around, open your eyes, appreciate what you've got, and then you won't be so glum all the time, and what's with you, snap out of it. The nefesh elokis says something much more profound than that. Tiferes Hashem v'hadar go'oinoi. Do you recognize the magnitude, the grandeur, the beauty, the power of Hashem? And you've got access. You've got access to that. Not only like on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, you've got access, you're going to come into shul, it's going to be very big, and you're going to... No, you've got a neshama. Your neshama is plugged into the mainframe. Your neshama has a direct line to Hashem. Concentrate on Tiferes Hashem v'hadar ge'oinoi, the incredible, massive power, infinite energy of Hashem, and you're plugged into that. And you're walking around like all down and upset and glum. Because you're out of touch, that's all. The only reason that a person would walk around feeling so bad about themselves or bad about their lives is because they're just out of touch. So if we concentrate on we misboinen, which is, as you will see, not only a theme of this chapter, but you'll see becomes the theme of a big chunk of Tanya. If we're misboinen, if we apply our minds on a regular basis, in a focused way, on truly allowing ourselves to understand how great Hashem is, we don't live with depression. We don't live with despondency. Let's use perhaps a slightly different example. But in today's environment, wherever you go in the world, guaranteed. I don't know if you had enough time in the UK to pick this up, but wherever you go in the world, basically what you discover is everybody's down. There's a few exceptions. And everybody's pretty convinced that the life that they're living is much worse than anybody else. Like I said, there are exceptions. I know certain people that say, whatever, I love my life and it's amazing, or whatever, because we all look at them and think I'd like some of whatever you're on. But the average person who's walking around is complaining, the government is inept, wherever you go in the world. I haven't yet traveled to a place where everybody says, oh, our government, unbelievable, such menschliche people, they're all amazing, they care about us, whatever. Everybody, the government is rotten. You go wherever it is in the world, what do people say? There's problems with education. There's a high divorce rate. Whatever it is. So a position of simcha is never a product of circumstance. Because there are people living the most incredible lives in the world and they still have what to complain about. Like they used to call the Jewish telegram that says, start worrying, details to follow. Right? Kvetch. We know how to kvetch. If there's something to complain about, we'll complain about it. Simchas Hashem, that's the point. The joy of knowing that I have a relationship with Hashem. The joy of awareness of what Hashem means. That's a choice. It's a choice that I focus on, something I think about on a regular basis, and I come over time to have more and more and more appreciation of what that means. It fills me with simcha. That's what the Nefesh HaElokis wants. Real simcha. So what we're illustrating over here is that the nature of our neshama, of our godly soul, is to find the value and pursue it, rather than to wait for something to hit us, for something to talk to us, for something to change us, for something to lift us. And the same will apply to all the various characteristics. Remember, every type of characteristics that a person has applies both in the positive and the negative. So all of the characteristics of a person, any kind of emotional response that a person has, is all, if it's going to be holy, if it's going to be positive, if it's going to be good, it comes from an intellectual exercise. I thought about it, I contemplated on it, I put Hashem at the center of the focus of my mind, and therefore I have these meaningful responses. And that's so now we've got, so to speak, the red corner and the blue corner. We've got the Nefesh HaElokis on the one hand and the Nefesh HaBahamis on the other hand. And so Mr. Hashem, next week we can have a look at what happens when they clash. So that's what we'll continue next time.